Okay, hi Anil. I'm very, very happy to see you. It's been, I think 4 years because I spoke with Barry Cleveland the other night, and it was January 2016 that we last met.
It's been a long time. Yes, the world has become an intriguing place in the subsequent years.
I know, I know, I know. Um, so really, I find it interesting that you're probably one of the longest, well, acquaintances on the internet that I've had in a way because um, I I started going to university in '93 and I had my first email address probably in early '94 or something, and joined a couple of mailing lists, and there was Anil Prasad there with Innerviews already operational, right? And like I don't know what the right word here is, but like, yeah, you say, and you think that you were the first to do that, right? You had like the first had a first music journalist with a website online, right?
Yeah, I was going to say, I recall an album called Taster showing up in the mail out of nowhere by Marcus Reuter. That time frame when I think I used to have the physical mailing address on the website. So yeah, I recall you getting in touch very, very early on. So one way or another, we've sort of been in touch for probably close to a quarter century,
Yes,
indeed.
yes.
And so, yes, going back to what you're saying, yeah, Interviews was unofficially started in '93,
Hmm.
officially launched in '94. It was the first online music magazine ever, even before MTV and Addicted to Noise. And of course, that's a cool thing to say. Obviously, this would have happened whether or not I had done this, but it
Hmm.
just happens to be the case that I was one of the first people to be experimenting with this sort of thing.
And what kind of content was it? What did you put up? Was it reviews first, or did you already have interviews then?
I had been writing for conventional print media for many years prior. I was based in Canada at the time. I had done work for, the CBC, CTV, the nefarious Sun chain, tabloid chain in Canada, and others. Kind of grooming myself to be a kind of journalist proper. There was a time where, I would even be sent out to cover the prime minister speaking, politics, in addition to, writing about music. If you can believe it, I would write about ballet and
Hmm.
review dance and stuff like that. It was an interesting period. The internet started to emerge in a big way. It was funny. I was talking to Tony Levin about this the other day because even he and I think, were exchanging emails in the mid '80s when I was a teenager. So we'd both been online for a very, very long time. And so I'd kept up on kind of what was changing across what was, the nascent World Wide Web of the early '90s. And I just kind of took it upon myself to think, well, what would happen if I took some of these previous interviews I'd done for various magazines without even thinking about words like copyright, and just
Hmm.
coding them in HTML and putting them on the web, just to see what that would be like. Um, Again, just as a personal project. And I did put up some of these early interviews. Rick Emmett, Adrian Belew,
Hmm.
1989 interview with him. And without even having any expectations, people just started finding it because there were no other interviews on the web at the time. And there was this messaging system, still exists to this day, called Usenet, which I'm sure you're
Hmm.
familiar with as
Hmm.
an early web guy. And people would, that was kind of the version of social sharing, right? In the early '90s, the horrors of Usenet, where anyone can be ultra anonymous, maybe even in a way you can't be now.
Hmm.
Um, and so people spread the word about this thing. There's this guy publishing free content, interviews with people. You can just go up and read it. What a radical concept. And that was kind of where it started. And it just kind of grew from there. And I just kept posting stuff, and I finally gave it a name. And then within a few years, I thought, I'm a terrible designer. Maybe I should get some other people to help me make this look good. And so it went. That's kind
So
of
the name came in 94 then?
the name existed in '93. It was a university project. I was at the time still a student at Carleton University Journalism School in Ottawa, Canada. Um, I came up with that name. I actually don't remember how that name came up. I don't think it had anything to do with the Stevie Wonder Innervisions album, but
Hmm.
seemed like a clever idea at the time,
Hmm.
and it has bizarrely stuck ever since, and took on a life of its own.
Hmm. So you were in your very early 20s then when you started this venture.
Indeed, I was, yes,
Yeah.
very young man, which I no longer am.
I think we're the same age or very close, actually, I think. Um, so journalism school, what does one learn there?
You learn a lot of things that I wish people knew now that anyone can be an author, anyone can be a journalist, anyone can write about music or interview people. You learn about the mechanics, the fundamental composition of what makes a good story, what you construct intelligently, what you leave in, what you leave out, how to prepare for an interview, how to research, how to be ethical,
Mhm.
how to work within legal constraints, how to contemplate things like slander and libel and what is allowable out there without getting sued. And also just, again, just being responsible about what you publish and don't publish. I think in the music journalism realm right now, such as it is, I think there's a lot of irresponsible kind of clickbaity behavior. I think there are times where, I would interview you and you would say some things to me that maybe you didn't intend to be on the record, or might hurt someone's feelings or might damage something. Um, and so as a journalist, you have to decide on a few things. Is this dirt so important that you think the world needs to know about it? Is it going to damage the person that you're speaking to? Is it going to hurt their career? Is it going to hurt someone else's career?
Mhm.
What we tend to write about kind of in the world of music and music journalism isn't necessarily world-changing stuff. If you told me some gossip about some musician within the confines of an interview, it's not like it's going to have global geopolitical ramifications. So, one can intelligently parse what someone says and go, I think this is valuable and useful for the world to know, and this stuff isn't. Or this might even get me in trouble, or him gossiping about this may be legally actionable in some way. That sort of level of, uh, you know, um, that sort of level of responsibility doesn't exist in the same way at the moment, and you kind of get a lot of that out of a good journalism school. I'm not saying everyone, just like you don't need to learn how to read music,
Mhm. Yeah.
um, but it can certainly still be very helpful as a musician. I think you don't have to go to journalism school, but it can also equip you with some valuable skills.
Yeah. So that's I don't think I ever thought about that really, what really makes a true journalist, right? And the story aspect seems to be important, as you said, like kind of extracting the story or a story from an interview. How do you go about that? Is there anything you can share with us?
Sure. I mean, it's funny when people, I'm in the odd situation that people review my work sometimes, which is really weird
Hmm.
to have happen. I mean, I did put out a book once, and that kind of especially opened up the world of reviewing the reviewer, or uh, interviewing the interviewer. This is a very different thing you and I are doing because we know each other, and you're not necessarily a music journalist. So in a way, you kind of are with all of your interview series, and you're already better at it than most people. Um, so, uh, the reason I bring that up is when people kind of talk about interviews, they go, "Well, wow, it's just a bunch of Q and A's. That's all it is."
Mm-hmm.
And that's absolutely not what it is. Those stories are slaved over. Without hyperbole, 75 to 100 hours of my life go into every piece. They're sequenced, they're remixed. And when I say remixed, I don't change what someone like you says, but I will change the order
Yeah.
of the questions. I will fly pieces of an interview from one part to another. So not dissimilarly to a track listing or a song sequence, you want the whole thing to play out and make some kind of intelligible sense as a story, and not be, this random collection of hodgepodge stuff. And I think, also as a music journalist, it's absolutely critical to take yourself as much out of the story as you can. Not everyone agrees with me on this. Certainly the classic music journalists of the 70s and 80s, whether it's the David Frickeys or Lester Bangs was a story and horror show unto himself. And he would, make the stories more about him than the musicians he covered. I don't believe in that at all. I'm at the polar opposite end of the spectrum, where I think it should be virtually entirely about the musician. And my role, for the reader's sake, is almost extraneous.
Mm-hmm.
And if they are remembering anything I did or said, then I've done something wrong, because it should be all about what you say.
Yeah. However,
Or what,
you give it a form, and you give it a shape
yeah.
that works, and that is attractive to the listener, hopefully.
Yeah, and in terms of the story too, I mean, the great thing about interviews and the emancipating factor of starting it in '93 was no longer having to be bound to a word count.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Up until then, and even whatever I do that's not for the interviews site now, I'm still always bound by the horrific word count or the editor's perspective on what something should or shouldn't be. And, so much music journalism, is base level, is lowest common denominator, have to tell the whole story of the musician, their influences, their favorite, candy as a child, whatever people are trying to kind of uncover, what batteries you use, in your pedals. I mean, there's always kind of a dictate from someone else. And with interviews, suddenly, I mean, it seems rote now, and it's really odd at the moment, because music journalism online, despite the fact that you can create the most wonderful long form pieces now, is retracting rapidly, to the point where we're back to 400 to 600 word articles, because people no longer have an attention span of any value anymore. 93, 94, when it started, I realized I can have a 20,000 word article and no one can stop me, and people will still read it. And that means you can tell wonderful stories. And if an artist has an album to promote, you can spend the first third of the interview on that new album and project. Then you have 2/3, or 10 to 12,000 words, where you can talk about just about anything else. That's luxurious, and that allows. It's not just about me as a journalist telling stories. It's about you as a musician being able to say what you want, elaborate, provide detail, and you yourself not be bound by that the constraints. When you do, I'm sure of course you've done many radio interviews, and you have to say what you say within 60 to 180 seconds, or you know you get forcibly moved on to the next topic. So probably more detail than you wanted, but just the landscape to create stories was truly an emancipating moment when it
Yeah.
started.
Yeah,
And
no,
continues
I'm
to this day.
yeah, I'm actually interested in the details. So whenever you feel like you want to say something about the details, I'm happy to hear those. So so basically, like the contents, let's say, that make the story are 100% by the person you are interviewing, and then you turn it into a piece of art, let's say, that does not reflect you but reflects the artist. And
That's the goal.
I just use the word piece of art because I think that's what it is, just like any other creative endeavor. Yeah. And So I'm wondering, on which level do you think does some sort of curation happen? Is it like the selection of the artists that you feature? Is that like largely driven by your personal interests? I know I understand that if you are writing to some outside publication, that maybe it's not that, but like the artists you interview on your own initiative, where does that come from?
That yeah, I mean, the selection of musicians is entirely curated. Absolutely. Um, the site is 95% a reflection of my own musical interests. There's a few interviews on there from various other magazines I wrote for that seem vaguely interesting, and I put them up there anyway. But
Mhm.
you could it would probably be a fun exercise for an interviews reader to go through that list and try and figure out who the 9 or 10 artists are on there that I actually have no interest in. But by and large, they're people I love. I have to be fairly frankly musically obsessed with an artist to do the level of work that is required for
Yeah.
these pieces. Um, when I wrote for the those other sort of Canadian newspapers, I mean, they would go, "Here's 800 words. We are assigning you this story. You are going to go write about this artist." And because you, as a music journalist, don't necessarily care about who it is you were talking to, you're not going to put a lot of effort into it. Whereas what's on interviews, uh, I'm trying not to sound over. Uh, I'm not trying to hype it significantly here, but I mean, my goal is to always try and do something that hasn't been done before,
Mhm.
to ask questions that haven't been asked before. For my own reading of all of these other interviews and these other dialogues that have been held, what has not been approached? And if an artist has a new project out, they're always going to want to talk about it, and you want to give them the room for that, because they're trying to create that awareness for what they do. And you wouldn't be in interviews if I didn't think that what you were doing wasn't fantastic. So happy to do that. And then beyond that, I really want to dig into the back catalog and
Mhm.
philosophy and spirituality. Talk about projects the artist never talks about, or experiences or bands that uh, you know, so many music journalists kind of go back to that horrific "who are your earliest influences" question. And if you're a music journalist and you're asking that question, you're doing it wrong, because you should never, ever ask that question. It's always out there, unless you're interviewing a brand new artist that's never been communicated with before. The question is meaningless and you're completely lazy. But talking about really early projects, like me asking you about the album Taster, how do you look back on that? That's an interesting question, because you probably have a lot to say about contextualizing your career at that moment, starting out. You're going to take that somewhere. So if you're going to talk to an artist about some point in their history, be a bit specific about it. So, I really like digging in that way, and it's usually mostly, but not always, but mostly fun for the artists as well, for them to know that the person they're speaking to actually really cares about what they're doing and what they've done.
Yeah. I mean, I think there is no need to hype interviews because, like, people, if you just go there as a music lover and you see the people that you talk to, and then you see that there's an actual, like, if you would print it out like a 20-page, essay, basically, which takes the form of an essay somewhat. And back in the mid 90s, um, I at least for me, like living in Germany, like, and not having had any uh, access to English or American or Canadian, for that matter, music press. I had never read an interview with David Sylvian or Robert Fripp or David Torn, or and like, so finding your website was just unbelievable. Like, and that you already had this sensibility to also, just like, people who study liner notes, where you're kind of like starting chunk the musicians into groups. So I understand, okay, that guy also played on the Christy Burke record, right? And then you have like these interesting relationships, which then become sort of like like the roadmap where you can then go and travel and discover your things. And so I think that your contribution, let's say, goes in a way goes even beyond the content of the interviews. Also, it's sort of almost like a recommendation machine of some sort that you build there, which I discovered quite a few artists, reading your website, reading your work.
Yeah, minus the AI-driven self-optimized algorithms, the original
Yes,
organic
yes.
recommendation engine.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So two questions come to mind here. Now, so what do you think about music journalism when it comes to reviews, music reviews?
Absolutely, entirely useless and no value whatsoever to human society. That's what I think of record reviews.
Mhm,
I used to do them. I know this as someone that has written hundreds of them.
mhm.
And every time I've written a record review, I have looked back at it and went, that is a completely useless piece of crap and has no meaning to anybody. Which is why, and in fact, Interviews for its first probably 12 to 15 years actually had a sizable review section. And I decided to jettison it because I would look back on the reviews I'd written and again, just look back at them as senseless crap. I realized if you take the artist conversation out of the writing, then there's no longer any value to it. The
Mhm.
value is in what Marcus Reuter has to say, not what Anil Prasad has to say. That is how I feel. And again, very few people agree with me on this. At the end of the day, I've even had conversations with Sid Smith about this, about the ephemeral nature of the record review. He and I once had a funny dialogue about recycling our own work, as in taking our old print-based things and tossing them in the recycling bin.
Mhm.
Um, and how this is sort of the inevitable outcome for all of this record review stuff. I've never met a music journalist that actually enjoys doing record reviews. Most people hate doing it. It goes back to the mysterious talking about music is like whistling about architecture quote that's been attributed to everyone from Frank Zappa to Laurie Anderson
Mhm.
to Adrian Belew. No one actually knows where that came from. I think it might be Zappa,
Mhm.
but and appropriated by Laurie and Adrian, but it could be wrong. Yeah, I mean, what does
So do you have any idea why that genre even exists?
music criticism in general? Well, I
Yes.
mean, it goes back to the dawn of the printed word, I think. I mean, I think concert reviews can be somewhat interesting in terms of living vicariously through the experiences of someone attending that you did not attend. When it comes to recordings, and especially in the year 2021, why do I need anyone to tell me what something sounds like when I can find out in 1 nanosecond myself and actually hear an excerpt or engage with that music, independent of all the musician compensation issues of streaming and piracy? At the end of the day, you can still listen to anything. In fact, that's sort of kind of gated um, access to music that music journalists used to have. Wow, I've got this album for free. Someone sent me a promotional compact disc or vinyl LP. Aren't I special? That no longer means anything. Everyone's got
Mhm.
the access to it, and things get leaked weeks, months, up to a year ahead of a release. Um, I don't think there's really any such thing as being an expert music reviewer. I think anyone involved in record reviews is a fraud, and I put myself in that category as well. Every record review that I ever wrote was fraudulent, meaningless. It was
Yeah.
an amateur act of criticism trying to bring some kind of personal perspective or value just something that does not need words attached to it. Having said that, on social media, I like pointing people to things that I like. Um, uh, but it's not really within the function or review. It's like, I think this is cool. Maybe you think so too. But
Mm.
at the end of the day, everything I really have to say is within the boundaries of these long form pieces on musicians. I think those do have some value.
I guess in the old music industry, um, the music reviewer had some sort of marketing function primarily, right?
Your quote generation, I mean, to this day, if you look at Steven Wilson's Facebook page right now, I mean, he's still doing that kind of get the pull quote out of the review and using it as a promotional component of a marketing campaign. A lot of artists do that too. I rarely actually cover artists for whom that means a lot for anymore. Yeah, I mean, record labels, it's really funny. It's like we're in 2021. The music industry has been completely overwritten in so many ways. Yet these kind of very old school attachments to even the way music journalism is generated is still remain. It's a very interesting thing. This sort of collision of new model and old model, and I think you see that in music journalism too.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. It's like for me, I started in 97, 98 with that album Taster, right? And I think I pressed maybe 300 copies of it and I sent out, I don't know, maybe 50 or something. And back then, I didn't believe that I need to, and I never thought that I would need to reach a lot of people to have an impact, right? It was more about reaching the right people. So I remember sitting there at the terminal at the university, like and researching DJs, like not the contemporary kind of DJ, like the radio DJ, college
Right.
radio, and there was a time when I tried to like send out one email or CD or whatever to a reviewer or to a DJ or like just to just to get my music out there, because that was at that time it was before the MP3 had been invented or it became popular in 2000 or 99 or something. I can't remember now, but so it was sort of like interesting that I never really felt like I do need to be part of that machine of that music business, where there's this big divide between the listener and the person who makes the music. And I'd always that's also why I was drawn to people like you, where it was kind of clear that you love what you do and you love the music, and it's about good communication in all directions, right? Like with the artist, but also with the audience that reads your work. So in a way, um, I find that like really interesting, because to me, like what you do and what I do, in a way, seems to be very similar. It's different. It's a completely different material that we're working with, right? But this 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 way of yeah, maybe you have better words for that, but it's kind of like a certain kind of a certain way of communicating that kind of like wants to take out the middleman, where it's really more about the truth, if there's any such thing, like a more direct communication.
I think there's truth in what you say. I would, having said that, I would say there's no way to ever equate the value of music journalism with the value of music itself. I don't think there's any comparison. Uh, I've said several times that I think the entire history of
Yeah,
music
I know.
journalism, every word, every written in the context of music journalism, has less value than the value of a single note of music. But yeah, in terms of the process,
Mhm.
there's a lot of similarities. Really, at some point, we were all recast as, quote, content providers, unquote, as opposed to musician, writer, sculptor, visual artist. No, we're just all content providers now. And as
Yes.
content providers, there are a lot of similarities on the web and beyond as we try to get our stuff out there.
Yeah. So there hasn't ever been like any commercial considerations of your work, as far as I know.
At the earliest stage of interviews, there was once some advertising. There was a barely, I think it was like John Durant's Alchemy Records, maybe, and maybe another record label. People have made plays to bring interviews into the whole Google AdWords, Google ad placement, recommendation, it's horrific on any kind of website. It's like sponsored post, what's Kim Kardashian injected into her butt today, type articles that somehow get associated with, serious content. And for someone that hasn't figured out the blurry divide between real news and fake news, they actually don't understand that those sponsored articles are entirely, algorithmic clickbait. And I kind of put my foot down and said, I'm just not doing this. I'm not going to, major publications have tried to bring this content into their spectrum. And somewhere in the late 90s or early 2000s, I decided that there's just no way. Life is so full of compromise on so many other fronts. I decided this was going to be one of the areas of my life where I would not compromise one iota, and have been mostly successful with that. I have other jobs that I do. I do content jobs I live in the San Francisco Bay Area now, though I used to be based in Canada. And I'm able to take these skills. It's interesting because, I came up on the web in the early 90s. I developed a lot of expertise in, working with the web, both technically, and in terms of content. So I make my money doing, work for companies in that way, writing for them, editing, packaging stuff for them. You'll never see my name on any of that, and I will never point anyone to any of it and say that I did it. But that frees me up to do this exactly as I want to do it without anyone actually I get harassed by countless people, but I have the license to completely ignore all of that. Thankfully.
So in that long history of being a music journalist, are there any particular, I don't even want to say interviews, but probably like phases in the history of how, you know what I'm going to say, but like what really has been, what has been going on in the last 20 years? How have things changed? How would you describe it from your perspective? Or even like the last 30 years?
Are you talking about interviews specifically or music journalism in general?
Let's start with your perspective that you have, like, or the experience you've made making the interviews for Innerviews.
Wow. Well, I mean, I don't even recognize the person who made the interviews of the 90s. I look back on some of those and I am horrifically embarrassed. And I've gone back and re-edited a lot of those pieces actually to take out the crap. Some of them are stiff. You look at anything in the 1990s on the site. Actually, some of them look okay now because I've completely redone them. And hopefully no one will ever find the original. I haven't changed what the artist said. I've taken out some of the things they said, and I've certainly taken out some of my questions. But when I started this as a child, basically a kid, early 20s, not even, I was in my late teens when I started writing about music for publications. There was a gee whiz wow factor. Oh my God. like Adrian Belew in 1989, one of my very first interviews. I was like, I'm talking to Adrian Belew from King Crimson. How is this possible? I'm just
Mhm.
in awe. Oh my God, I'm gonna like lose my mind, and I'm nervous, and I'm asking incredibly stupid questions. And not only am I doing that, I'm cutting him off,
Mhm.
every few minutes, and trying to interrupt him because I have no idea what I'm doing at that point. I hadn't even gone to journalism. One of the interesting things, like, I suppose, is I went to journalism school after I started being a music journalist. So there's actually this phase of when I was doing these pieces before I was actually properly trained, and anything from 1989 to 94 really speaks to that. Um, so I would ask very ephemeral questions, and I would ask very specific questions, which are the death of any good interview. You can have a few of them, a few very specific project-based interviews. Why did you do this? How did you do that? How did you find this person in terms of working with them? How did you connect, with this person? And those questions have no value, actually. And I started to realize as the further I went along that the much more open, broad-based philosophical questions are the ones that generate the most interesting answers. Currently, I start almost every interview with, um, what do you consider the value of music during this complex and chaotic time? Which a lot of people hate that I do that. I've actually received hate mail for this, believe it or not. Um, I find that the answers artists are giving me to this question, especially in the era of COVID-19, are utterly fascinating. And in fact, the answer to that question tells you so much of what you need to know about that person as an individual in terms of how they're um, calibrating their life in this incredibly difficult period, and also where they see their music fitting into that.
Mhm.
I consider that a fantastically great question, as opposed to, how did you get Peter Hamill to do a nose flute solo, on this track from 1977 on this Charisma Records compilation that came out in the Ukraine? I mean, I used to ask questions like that. I don't
Mhm.
anymore.
Mhm.
Um, so that's really how it's evolved into a much more um, philosophical driven thing. And then a lot of interviews end, or I ask the question and then I put it at the end. There's this question about spirituality I often ask musicians, again, which really annoys some people. Readers really, they either love that question or they want to kill me for it. Um, and they want to kill me for it when the answer isn't when the answer defies what they were hoping to hear from that artist.
Mhm.
But why do I ask that question? It's never a religious based question. It's more about finding out what makes you tick. What is driving this? What sort of inner voice are you reflecting in your work? Um, I'm not trying to find out whether someone's Christian or an atheist, um, or a devout follower of any other spiritual or religious tradition. Artists will often just tell me, and I've gotten some really negative feedback when the artist lets it be known that they're an atheist, especially, which I find fascinating in 2021 that this could still be a thing. Having said that, I live in the United States of America, where it very much is a thing. But then I've got like I did an interview with Steve Morse just a couple of months ago, where he talks all about his adherence to Christianity and how much Jesus Christ has meant to him, and that's fantastic and great. And I'll put that in there, and I will represent that with equal conviction as the artist wants me to. Um, I wasn't asking these questions in the 90s. And I think getting older, as you change as a human being, just as your personal musical output you yourself has dramatically evolved in the last 15 years, um, and your ambition on your projects. I'm not trying to equate what I do with that, but I think, expanding your horizons, hopefully, is something that comes along with the aging process if you're allowing
Yeah,
your
and
skill to evolve.
yeah, yeah. That's
So,
why I was asking that question. Just to understand where you see the evolution, let's say, of your style or of your personality as reflected in your work. And
there's also one more thing I should add to that, and how I would say the single biggest lesson, the single biggest change over 30, I can't believe I can say 30 years of doing this, but I can, is just learning how to shut up.
mhm.
I realize I just said that by cutting you off in the middle of your question. But so but not interrupting people as they're talking, which I just did to you. But really just letting the musicians say as much as they want to say, even if sometimes I'm biting my tongue and I really want to intervene and shift something elsewhere. Sometimes those moments where I've just let them ramble, the first half of the question may have been complete crap, but when they took their dramatic pause and I really wanted to start a new question, but didn't, that may end up being the single most important moment of the whole interview, is when the
Mhm,
pregnant pause came and you
mhm.
just let them continue down their path. That's a skill. That's patience. That
Yeah,
you can't do that when you're a kid.
yeah. It's wonderful that you that you bring this example, because I had a conversation with a few people in my Living the Dream series last weekend, where we talked about improvisation, and it was sort of like a similar point where in improvisation, in group improvisation, when there is that pregnant pause sometimes, and and there's like two ways. There could be that bad outside influence that asks some stupid question that doesn't relate to what's going on, or you wait until the improvisation continues, until like the complete utterance is then taken somewhere else, and that's when the magic happens. So I totally understand what you're saying. And even just doing these interviews with people now, I'm learning a lot about timing, and as you said, like shutting up. And it can be hard sometimes, I know.
When I see some of these YouTube interviews, I mean, everyone seems to have, their dog seems to have a YouTube interview channel now, and I'm just going to state it for the fact, and if someone wants to say I'm a jaded old loser for saying this, go ahead and say it. But I mean, there's a lot of amateur people doing this that don't understand the value of shutting up,
Hmm.
and they're kind of caught in my like early 90s, like wow, I've got this guy on the other, this incredible person whose entire discography I've ingested for 30 years of my life on the line, and they're too kind of rabidly um adhering to fan mode.
Hmm.
That's another thing that's changed, is getting out of fan mode, no longer being, it's okay to be an admirer.
Yeah.
But if you're just coming at it exclusively from a fan basis, you're probably not going to get a lot of value out of the conversation, or you're just going to tell the exact story that the other 200 people in the middle of the press junket organized by the record label are going to get. So,
Yeah, also there I see the parallels to my life. I think the point at which I really at which the world of the professional, let's say, musician opened up for me was when I was capable of not being a fanboy. It's very true. Like there was this one event. Don't I can't remember if I ever told you about this, but there was a guitar craft seminar in Aalfeld, Germany, and the closest airport was Hanover Airport. And I was the only one there that night that Robert Fripp arrived at the airport, and I drove there and picked him up. And that was an incredible experience, because for some reason I mean, this is kind of like half jokingly, okay, but that was the night that I learned to drive, like really to drive safely, right? It's what it felt like to me. And um, and it was the moment where I was not, um, where I realized that like the artists that I admire are just human beings just like you and I. And once I was on that level, I also didn't have to give anybody a copy of my CD, right? Like it was kind of like, and I didn't really have to. I didn't have to want anything at all anymore from any situation where I was meeting other artists, and for some reason that was sort of like the brought me the relaxation to then have people recognize me for what I do, right? And in a way, I just from my perspective, when you interviewed me in the past, there is this you have a way to radiate, let's say, okay, to radiate something that makes people feel comfortable. Very simply put, but really making people feel comfortable. And you just mentioning the question that you started asking recently, I don't know when that was, about spirituality, and like you usually for some people it's hard to open up about that, and they'd rather not talk about, like, their beliefs, right? And I think it's a really incredible thing if you can get into a communication with people where even this, like, these deeper levels can unfold. And
Yeah, and that question can't be asked until mid to late interview, because
mhm,
when I speak to you, we already know each other. So I could open up an interview with you with that, but with other people where it's like the first time, which is almost every interview, it's a one-off.
mhm,
It's a
mhm.
one-off random, collision of two people that will probably never be in touch again for the rest of their lives. That question has to be held for quite a while, because they need to understand that A, you understand who they are, B, you're asking questions with honorable intent, and then C, they're at that point comfortable enough to actually open up about it. So yeah, if you know, and it's also a really weird question for most people, because USA Today or New York Times are not going to ask that question.
Mhm.
So yeah, that's also part of the storytelling. Going back to that part of our conversation here, is just the timing of when you bring certain things up. That's another thing you learn only after doing uh, a lot of interviews over time. I'm still learning. I every single interview is still still a learning experience for me, and I really do think the current pieces at the moment are a quantum leap forward from the previous ones. Even 5 years ago, the new ones are at a whole other level. At least I believe, just
Wonderful.
because I keep growing as a person as well, and I think that's reflected. I mean, there's an interview with Sheila Chandra, the wonderful vocalist across many genres, but uh, pigeonholed into sort of South Asian constructs, which is hardly the only thing she does. But I mean, that's one of my more proud moments, if I can say that. I don't know if you've read that interview. I would recommend you do, because it
Mhm,
really digs into the torture of being an artist. And she
mhm,
lost her ability to sing, and had her entire performance spectrum taken away from her, and she had to recalibrate her whole life. And that's all in there. Um, and that was real storytelling. It's as good as the artist. Not, I can ask good questions, but at the end of the day, it's about the artist's willingness to communicate. And I hadn't interviewed Sheila in about 22 years. um so yeah, the other odd thing about interviews, since we're just kind of riffing here, is that the relationships get built through it, strangely, because most musicians, not all of them, I assure you, but most musicians tend to like the final outcome. uh and she still remembered what we did 22 years previously. And sort of brought that uh um level of kind of warmth and openness to the new one in even greater capacity.
Yeah, it's funny. I remember that interview that was 2023, 24
Yeah.
years ago. But I haven't
The
read
new,
the new
yeah,
one. I haven't read
I've
the new
just,
one.
the new one, you have read it?
I haven't read it.
Oh, I recommend it. I think you would get a lot out of it.
Okay, so that was like the sort of like how the development that you went through. At the same time, we have seen like these crazy changes in the music industry,
Mhm.
and you have sort of like a special view on it because you are actually talking with the artists within that system, and I know that, just for lack of a better description, maybe you are kind of like concerned. Let's just put it that way. You can correct me, okay? But just you're like concerned also for the artists and about the artists in a way, and you have been very vocal about like pointing out the problems that have arisen in the last, let's say, 20 years, 15, maybe 15, 20 years. And it seems to me like this is sort of like the development that we're seeing in the culture of the music industry, let's say, is sort of like really the opposite of how, you know, where you've gone with your work, let's say, right? Like where you've gone for to completely remove yourself from any marketplace. And on the other hand, there is Spotify and like these crowdfunding platforms and stuff like that. So if you feel like it, just we can continue riffing on a little bit on the music industry.
As you know, I have no lack of opinions on this topic.
Yeah. So is there a way to kind of like summarize maybe even what?
Summarize
Yes,
the last
yes.
50.
Is there
Sure.
anything in particular that you feel like that you're very concerned about, let's say, and maybe
Well,
more on the side of the artists, not so much on the side of the industry itself. I think, yeah.
well, yeah. I mean, I've been very outspoken across the last 12 years on the topic of especially streaming compensation and this astonishing impenetrable black box where we've hit this point where not only are artists getting paid virtually nothing, they're not being told how those calculations are made, when changes are made to the calculations, or even when and how they will get paid. It's stunning.
Mhm.
It's absolutely, I mean, as if the system wasn't oblique enough as it was in previous constructs. I have become probably one of the ultimate music industry pariahs.
Mhm.
Music industry people hate me. I have received death threats for the things that I have said, in terms of my criticism of practices, especially when Spotify was getting going. And I was one of, it's just a fact, I was one of the only people initially pointing out this bizarre den of inequity that had been created for artists. And people can go read that stuff. It's like chronicled all over the web, or you can go to the Innerviews site and find some of these pieces. There's some on Medium that have been extremely well read, and you know, you know, some of them are into even the millions of reads, like far beyond anything I've ever done on Innerviews itself, frankly. Um, and the question keeps coming up: why, Anil Prasad, do you even give a crap? You're a music journalist. Why does this even matter to you? Why are you so concerned about the state of musicians? Shouldn't you just know your place and just
Mhm.
write about the press release that came out about the album and just be a good little boy and play ball with the rest of the music business? And no, uh, absolutely not. And the reason is that most of my friends are musicians like you. I have dozens of very close musician friends, and then I have hundreds of acquaintances that are musicians. day in and day out, I hear what you are all going through, what you're all facing. Interviews is a mirror of all of those voices. And I hit a point where I was just angry on behalf of you all that
Mm-hmm.
all of this could be happening, that none of you have a voice. No one is saying anything. The music journalists, by and large, especially at the corporate level, have been bought and sold by the streaming companies. At the time of Spotify's emergence, one of its greatest cheerleaders, a very famous music commentator who will go unnamed here, was actually under contract with Spotify to
Mm-hmm.
promote their products, and he was doing it within the guise of being a tastemaker. It was kind of one of the earliest versions of paid for placements, and this gentleman who is an extremely well-known music commentator, and I kind of went to war over it
Mm-hmm.
in the background, and because he tried to bring me into it, and uh, this man likes to write letters. I'm going to leave it at that.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
and he was on one side of it, and I told him that I would have nothing to do with this. And he handed me, he's like, Anil, here's 20 free Spotify accounts from you. And I'm like, how do you have 20 free Spotify accounts to give me? Who are you? Are you even actually a music journalist anymore? No, you're not. So I dug into that and was shocked at what I kind of found in terms of the kind of malfeasance, manipulation, even the criminal history of some of these companies and the people involved with them.
Mm-hmm.
And I started writing about it. I wasn't, there was no mainstream content about the debauchery of the streaming services. Uh, I was also extremely disappointed that music fans who were suddenly presented with all of these free, so-called free services, all they were doing was kind of reveling in the free and not spending even 1 second contemplating, well, how can music suddenly be completely free?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe something's going on. um, and I kind of took it upon myself, rightly or wrongly, to go, people need to understand why their music is suddenly so-called free, and that there is no such thing as free, and that there are people, your musicians that you admire, are suffering incredibly in the background. And so, yeah, I wrote myriad articles. I spoke at music industry conferences before they stopped wanting to hear from me because I was just too blunt an object.
Mm-hmm.
Um, uh, I remember doing a New Zealand music industry conference where someone at Warner New Zealand basically wanted me dead on the spot because I was because they came up and they gave a spiel about the wonders of streaming for musicians and fans alike. And of course, I mean, if you all, many different types of people will be listening to this conversation, but I would ask that you all look into who has funded Spotify, what labels are involved, what venture capital firms have been involved. Follow the money trail as it is. That's always something people should be doing. And you'll see trails to all kinds of malfeasance and horror. And the what's left of the major labels and the conglomerates are all very much involved with companies like Spotify in an almost pyramid scheme style monetization that completely cuts musicians and independent labels out of the picture. Um, I just felt people needed to know about this, and my making people aware of that again made me more enemies than you can possibly imagine in the music industry, and it continues to this day. It's very, very funny. The musicians tend to really promote interviews, really tend to like what I do, most of them, not all of them. But if you talk to a music industry person, you will hear 4-letter words attached to my name that would probably blow your mind. Um, so I'm not sure what that means, but in recent times, I don't do as much of it. because all the information is out there, and the information, despite being out there, people still are letting this thing unfold as it is without
Yeah.
trying to intervene as musicians individually or musicians in aggregate. Um, I feel like I've hopefully helped get some of the information out there. Sad fact of the matter is not a lot has been done with it. Um, I could say a lot more on that if you want.
I think that probably the saddest aspect of all of this, which you haven't mentioned yet, is that because of the way that the artists, and I'm talking about like the generations that are older than me, I'd say, like, have been brought up by the system, is that it's hard for some of them to really understand what's going on.
Mhm.
And I think so, in a way, it's, I don't blame them, because well, you could blame them, but it's just like that as if that part of the brain has been kind of primed in such a way that you still need to they're still trying to see the good in it, right? So when, people say something like, oh, yeah, Spotify is like the new radio, or like YouTube is like the new radio, and stuff like that. uh, in a way, it's um, people have not understood that we are actually working for those companies to make them money. So, like, the best example is, if I put music on Spotify, and there are a few of my albums on Spotify, if I would start to promote them, and by sending out links to Spotify, I'm not make there's it doesn't make a difference for me. But some people may start using Spotify because of me, and
Mhm.
they will use it not to listen to my music. Yeah,
Well,
and
yeah,
they will
and
make then will they the money that basically, like, all the musician itself becomes the content, in a way, and the marketing efforts, and like uh, uh, the bad situation that we, if I say, like, we, like, some musicians are in, right? Trying to get people to hear what we do, and then jump on that wagon, believing that people will discover my music via Spotify, which is kind of impossible. Like, I think it's impossible. But then I would be talking and promoting Spotify, and I give Spotify value, and that's why I'm not playing. I'm trying to, as much as possible, not play that game. And I remember that when we last met, or maybe the time before, I can't remember the name of the place in San Francisco that we played with Stickman, but um, anyways,
Slim.
Slims, exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Um, I was really, really, uh, I hated, and I can't even remember the name, Pledge Music. Started hating that company,
We saw what
because,
happened with that, didn't we?
yeah, exactly, exactly. And and really, it's like, if this world of prostitution, because that's what it is, kind of like, it's trafficking of some sort that's happening there. And yeah, but what, like, my point was that I think, like, the sad part of it is that, um, for some of us musicians, it's really difficult to understand what's happening there, and that we're being taken advantage of in more than one way.
Oh, you're being entirely taken advantage of. Again, a very complex conversation, one that not all musicians even agree with. Um, it's intentional obfuscation. You're being specifically written out of the model. You're not supposed to know how it works. The
Mm,
fact that we have reached what, close to or more than a decade of streaming, and the fact that you still don't know how the compensation model works is shocking.
mhm.
And imagine that being transplanted into any other industry. And we use the example of someone coming in off the street into a convenience store and trying to buy a loaf of bread, and not being told what the price of that, the store shopkeeper not allowed to like have a price on that loaf of bread, or allowed to understand how much money the consumer is going to pay for that bread, etc. I mean, it's an incredible thing that this construct uniquely exists in the music industry, where if you look at the worlds of ebooks, or you look at the worlds of Netflix, or um, Disney Plus, or whatever the video streamers are, those ecosystems of people are getting compensated. Yes, there are problems with those models as well,
Mhm.
but not even close to the level. I mean, there's a huge element of commoditization, especially on the video front. And fees are falling dramatically in that realm too, but there's not even a remotely close parallel to what's happened with music.
Mhm.
Um, they have successfully convinced musicians en masse that this is all good for them. This is the only model that exists. And if you don't play ball, you're a loser. You're behind the times. You're technologically illiterate. What they're trying to do is exactly what the, railroad barons or whoever across the realm of the industrial era has tried to do, which is to prevent people from organizing and presenting their views in aggregate. Um, and I'm not the first person to have said this, even back 8 or 9 years ago, but if musicians kind of collectively organized, they could completely transform how the streaming universe works in terms of royalties, compensation, and transparency. You all just one day say, you don't get any more of our music until you fix this.
Mhm.
The problem is that musicians tend to be so individually focused on their own projects, maybe focused too competitively, not really looking at the kind of the big picture ecosystem that they're a part of. And I wish more musicians would do that.
Mhm.
Um, we can talk about Bandcamp for a moment. Based in Oakland, California, very near where I live. And it's possible to be completely transparent, completely honorable, and still make a truckload of money as Bandcamp is doing. This
Mhm.
can be done. I mean, so for all of the evils of streaming, I'm very thankful that there's a company like Bandcamp that is still committed to ensuring you all get paid as you should.
Yes. Yeah. And the way they do that is by avoiding the old structures. Like,
Well,
for
yes,
example,
kind of,
by specifically stating that they're not going to pay mechanicals on streams or something like that,
yeah.
like so they completely disregard the past and start with a fresh model. And I think that's why it's so wonderful, and it really has been wonderful for me. I've started using it in 2010, I think, about 2010, and um, back then people were already saying it's impossible, you can't make money with music sales anymore. Absolutely not true. Like my numbers have gone up over those 10 years or 11 years now, and which I find really wonderful that something like that is possible.
Well, yeah, you have to find the people still willing to pay for music, and there's
Yeah.
more than people want to acknowledge. And certainly the mainstream music industry does not want to acknowledge this. And I can tell you for a fact that they consider things like the so-called vinyl revolution nothing more than a colossal thorn in their side, because they thought they were going to completely get out of physical media a few years ago, and they're remaining in it, on two realms: the deluxe edition box set and vinyl. But Bandcamp has proven that people are willing to even pay digitally still.
Yes.
Um, and people still want a quality of experience, including audio quality. So yeah, things are not completely dead. You just need to find that small percentage of people still willing to support and engage with you directly.
So in a way, those articles that you mentioned that you had written about Spotify, etc., are sort of like works that are meant, well, not probably meant to educate people, but that hopefully educate a few people. Would you agree with that? Because, like, from my perspective as an artist, it turns out to be the case that really I just can't expect the public or even like my fans to understand or to know what's going on. So I made that like part of my task, to go out and just explain to people, like, if you and I say like something, you seem to love the music I do, or you seem to love what I do. Okay. And so if you want to support me, trust me that you should support me by going to Bandcamp, for example, or by buying a CD after a show, right? There are just like these few ways that I can can ensure that that I can stay alive, you know, and I have to, and I had to educate my audience.
And I wish more musicians would do that, because musicians, especially in the streaming era, but even before, have been long trying to project invincibility and success, even if the success isn't there, because to not do that shows that you are weak and that nobody is paying attention. So I applaud when people like you do what you do. I remember I was at the great jazz drummer Billy Cobham played a local show, and I remember him coming up to the front of the stage and going, "I'm going to take a pause here for a second, people. I need to tell you exactly how the streaming crap works." And I was like, "Really? Are you really about to do this?" And he spent 5 minutes breaking it down for people and saying, telling them, "You really want to support me? You're going to go out to that merch table right now. Sorry, at the end of the show, and you're going to buy a CD or an LP, because that's the only way I'm ever going to make money from this music." I thought that was fairly amazing. I've seen a few other artists do that as well, but almost nobody does. They almost say Spotify under their breath. There's obviously a huge generational divide here. I think streaming is here to stay. It's never going away. It's done. This is the model. What needs to change, though, is the governmental oversight of that model, and the ensuring that people just get paid a living wage. It's astounding. If I recall correctly, the average salary at Spotify for anyone at the company is between 100 and 120,000 US dollars, plus benefits, plus stock. Compare that to any of the musicians that enable that business to exist at all. They own vast tracts of real estate. Daniel Ek is a billionaire. Why is he a billionaire? Why is he allowed to be a billionaire while Marcus Reuter is sitting there, wondering why he just got a 76-cent check for his efforts,
if at all.
It's funny. The other thing you were talking about, yeah, indeed, was when a musician sends people to Spotify, in a way, you're basically in some way sending them away from your music, because after a track or a few, suddenly it's going to say, "Well, you like that, you're going to like this other thing too," and they're going to send you away from your music to a different artist or a playlist or something.
Yeah.
Maybe they'll never come back to your music.
And those playlists, they've also been bought. It's also like somebody has paid to be on a
Black
playlist.
box,
Yeah, it's horrible. That's why
the other thing about the playlisting thing that's fascinating, because I do, like I said, I do a lot of Bay Area marketing work that pays the bills. So I'm around people in their early 20s all the time. And one of the disturbing trends that I see amongst these kids, taking away the monetization conversation, taking away the fact that you're all being screwed mercilessly from a business perspective, is a lot of these kids don't even know the names of artists anymore. All they know the names of playlists. They know the names of these like mood-based aggregations of the music. And you ask them, "Well, who do you like in that playlist?" And they're like, "I don't know. It's just cool music." That's alarming. It's alarming that and this is not everybody. Of course, people know some artists, but I feel kind of the playlist mentality is kind of removing at least a component of the intellectual curiosity about who it is that created that music, as opposed to it just being this kind of, this sort of wave of feel good commodity, um, and lifestyle accompaniment. And again, that works really well for the streaming companies because they don't really care about you. They don't care about your album. They don't care if it's a Marcus Reuters stream or, the sounds of a porpoise, overlaid over, a techno beat. It doesn't matter to them. And that's why we have all these hilarious anonymous artists, right? There's been so many articles written about this sort of scams musicians and non-musicians alike have done, like, an album of like 110-second songs or whatever, because Spotify will, treat each one of them as a track.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
think your future, Marcus, is in 10-second musical vignettes. You may want to consider that. Todd Morton too.
Yeah, I don't I really don't see any future in that. um, you see, like now with the COVID situation, we have another event that has been like devastating and on so many levels. And I don't want to just speak for about musicians or like everybody involved with anything that has to do with community, right? Is sort of like in a bad bad position, and and I really have to say, like, it feels like I just, I want to talk a little bit about myself here just for a moment. Uh, the It felt like I had been in a process of reinventing myself. Like when I 2014 when I turned 42, like I felt like, oh, okay, I've basically done everything I wanted to do, and like I was like happy with the work I'd done, and I had some sort of like burnout, let's say, and like, I just, and then I started to sort of like find something new, or get kind of like reinvigorated making music, and also I kept touring, and I opened myself up to interact more with my fans and friends and the audience in general. And so then now, while this process of reinvention was still unfolding, there is this bizarre extreme cut which forces not only me, like, but potentially forces everybody, and not just in the music business, not just musicians. I mean, not just musicians, not, forces everybody to have to reinvent themselves. And like where you say, like you're seeing so many people that are doing interview shows on YouTube, or, like also like podcasts. And I'm also doing this. I'm doing this as part of um, my process of like self-discovery, right? To see a kind of, is there any future in like, people need to understand that I'm coming from a position where I'm a total loner. I could be happy just being alone my whole life and just doing my own thing in my own world. Like, I don't need other people. And then I've like kind of like turned myself around 180 degrees, or maybe just 160 degrees. And
Careful what you ask for, right?
yeah, I know. Yeah, exactly. But now, and now I'm like almost 180 degrees turned around, and I have become somebody who does a show like this, and I talk to people like you, right? And I'm putting myself into this position, and I actually agree that when I'm like listening back to these conversations, especially also when I'm talking with more than one person, I feel like I have a talent to sort of be a moderator. I can do that, okay, right? Like, or at least better than other people that I see trying to do it. And so what I'm trying to say here is that, so in a way, I'm like being forced to do something else. Like, in a way, it's like as if as if what has started with the big change in the music industry, where then, as you know, as a result, the music industry helps the funding of the streaming services, and then they get money on both ends, right? And somehow it feels like what everybody, like what the demons wanted, has become, is like they have gotten everything, and now it's the artists that even like can't even like perform anymore. Then you get by like maybe for 9, 10, 12 months doing something else, and then you try something else, and you realize that the trying to do these other things can potentially kill your original vocation, right? Like, and that's where I'm personally sort of like confused a little bit. Like, how can I make sure that this situation and this new interaction that I'm kind of that I kind of want to have that interaction with people. I want people to want to talk with me, right? And so, what does that mean for my art in the end? And that's where the big question mark is.
This is a truly impossibly bizarre era we're living in. I was just talking to my wife about this just yesterday, that we're about to hit 11 months of quarantine. Um, Astounding. The impact on my life as well has been staggering, as it has been for just about everybody.
Yes.
And we're also, of course, very frustrated because we've played by the rules, and the large part of Western society unwilling to play by the rules is the reason you and I are still sitting inside endlessly, because COVID-19 could be virtually eliminated within 1 month of coordinated discipline. In New
Yeah.
Zealand, they are holding concerts with 20,000 unmasked people right
Mm-hmm.
now.
Mm-hmm.
This can be fixed. At any rate, we're not here to talk about that. But I mean, in terms of the impact, um, again, yeah, most of my friends are musicians, and you have all been so disproportionately demolished by this, because the monetization of your recordings is already so impacted. And those of you who have figured out how to make a living on the road have had that all taken away from you. I wish I had some great solutions. I mean, your pal Tony's doing a hardcover book. I have a lot of friends doing a lot of teaching. It's funny, my son Devin, who's a guitarist, he has the availability of musicians we couldn't have ever imagined him taking lessons with before right now. And I'm like, I can't even believe some of the people you're doing lessons with right now, because in the cost structures, I can get you a lesson with some of these people. Is, uh, you know, uh, I'm laughing here, and I'm not trying to laugh. It's cool that Devin gets to take, guitar lessons with famous musicians right now, but everyone's scrambling to make money at the moment. And all I can say is, I guess we just all have to be more creative than ever. Oddly, a lot of physical releases are still coming out. The vinyl pressing plants seem completely booked. The
They are.
deluxe edition box sets seem to be. It seems like there's never been a period where these classic bands like are now putting out these like 20 to 100 disc box sets that people in quarantine still seem to be purchasing. I maybe it's time for the Marcus Ryder box set. I'm actually serious. You can actually do a pretty cool, one-off box set of from your early works to now.
Yeah.
You could actually do a really cool one. Sell, a lot of my friends are doing this, selling, limited editions in the 250 to 500 piece realm, and just being very direct in their communication with their fans, going, this just costs a bunch of money, a lot went into it. You're also helping me do the next big
Yeah.
project for the rest of the world. I think this California Guitar Trio guys just announced they're working on a box set. I think they're all pals of yours too, actually.
Yes.
In
That's
fact,
for
you guys were all in in the Crafties together, weren't you at
Yes.
some point?
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, yeah. I do think one thing musicians hate to do, and we talked about this earlier, again, is to scrape away that veneer of invincibility. And I think there's never been more of it. It's okay to tell people you're struggling if you are. In fact, I would say that may be the most important thing that comes out of this conversation is musicians telling fans, here's what's really going on with me. You know, I'm struggling. I can't be on the road right now. I'm making all this great music, would love for you to support it beyond streaming. Some of you still have great jobs. Some of you are able to work from home right now. And if you're one of those people, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
And since you don't have the disposable incomes, you're not going out having dinner, doing all this stuff, why don't you consider putting some of that money towards the creation of art? I think it's okay to do that for musicians, and I wish more of them would do it. And I still see musicians projecting the veneer of invincibility, even during COVID-19, acting like things are kind of normal when we all know they're not.
It's you're absolutely right with what you're saying. There is an additional layer that has kind of like presented itself to me, which is that the competition now between independent musicians, because of what you just described, has become sort of like, for lack of better terms, like strange. And like even the, we just spoke about Bandcamp, and I'm a supporter of Bandcamp, but they started introducing these Bandcamp Fridays, and wow, that's a good thing.
Yeah.
It has also created this strange situation where everybody's fighting for attention on that one day, and it has been. I talk with some friends who suddenly started saying to me, Marcus, like, I feel like I'm now in competition with you. And not just because Bandcamp Fridays, it's also because of the teaching and like everything like this. Uh, Even this thing that we're doing here, right? It's something that takes away space somewhere else, that takes away time somewhere else for somebody else to present their music or whatever, right? And I just wanted to put that out there, that there are side effects, let's say, that I don't think we can only start understanding what may. I have no idea what will happen, but
is that really any different than,
it is.
musicians have always been very competitive and have always,
It is.
I've seen so many musicians trying to undercut one another across these. I've got really become intimately familiar with some musicians over times, and the brutality sometimes between various musicians, and you know exactly what I'm talking about, can be spectacular.
Mm-hmm.
And this is actually one of the reasons that the streaming services have managed to take over and engulf musicians, because musicians tend to operate uh, independently of one another and are in such competition and don't want to project weakness. Everyone's supposed to be a success all the time. Back in the real world, if we ever get our real world back, there's always a scramble, people trying to undercut one another for gigs and attention. Bandcamp Fridays have become slightly amusing. It's interesting that one's purchase on Bandcamp now means that they get a daily or multiple times daily communication from the artist.
Mm-hmm.
And so there are days where I open up my email and there's like, because I bought hundreds and hundreds of things on Bandcamp. And that means I get dozens upon dozens of Bandcamp emails, sometimes daily. So I see that scramble, that competition, especially as it aligns to Bandcamp Fridays. But I don't think anyone needs to feel bad about that. I think it's okay. You're all promoting to your own audiences.
Mm-hmm.
I would think there's a very specific audience for what you do that doesn't cross over with a lot of other people.
Yeah.
Um, but the noise is absolutely spectacularly brutal at the moment. Cutting through that din, I mean, as a music journalist, I probably get pitched virtually in terms of like kind of emails I get from labels and artists. I'm sure there's 1 to 200 of those every single week, and they
Hmm.
have different temperatures of desperation attached to them. Um, uh, yeah, I wish I had any kind of solution. I don't, other than, offering really differentiated cultural products, intriguing packaging. The phraseology limited edition still seems to really mean something to physical media people. It seems to really spur them into purchasing actions sometimes.
Yes. Yeah.
So doing strategic limited physical editions at a premium and being transparent with your fans about that premium. Um, I think those are just a few things. I mean,
Yeah.
I know a
I,
lot of I was gonna say people are booking tours for September right now. I was just talking to Nick Beggs just a few minutes ago, but ahead of our conversation here. He's convinced there will be no gigs till 2022, and that everyone that's booking a tour in 21 is really kind of smoking something. I would agree with him.
yeah.
I think we have
I think there's also like a more of a technical reason for that, because if touring will be possible again, there will be thousands and thousands of acts flooding the market, and everybody wants those gigs, right? And
and you need the venue. You want the venue hold. Having the
yes,
venue hold
yeah,
enables you to move that date later. Yeah, I
yeah,
get that, but it's still really, from an outsider perspective, it is really wacky. So
it is, it is.
yeah,
Yeah, and I don't expect to be touring this year either. So um, even though there's a tour booked already, or a few tours already,
but Stickman or
yeah,
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 I hope they can happen.
yeah.
It's been a long time since we've
You
seen you
know,
on the west coast of California.
just like this, just before COVID came about, I got my new visa. 3 years cost me about $4,500,
Oh no.
right? Yeah,
Yeah.
people are not considering, or do not know what kind of investment like we musicians make. Even just like driving to embassies endlessly to to get visas and stuff like that. But that's something else. But anyway, yeah, I hope,
Especially
I
for the
really,
US. Wow, the US is brutal for that. Yeah.
yeah, it's always been difficult, and yeah. But anyway, like, yeah, like applying for a working visa, which is what I need in order to perform in the US. It's the lawyer that I work with said to me that it's exactly the same process as if you were asking to immigrate.
Hmm.
Same papers.
Yeah. Who knows what's about to transpire for our friends in Britain with Brexit? My God.
Yeah,
Yeah. Um,
I have to say, Brexit really hurt me a lot. I just emotionally, like really emotional. I don't understand it. It's really, it's so wrong. Well,
well, this is what an incredible political construct we're in at the moment, where society after society votes against its best interests. It's remember the country I live in. We were the country that invaded its own capital a few weeks ago. Okay, so um,
are you going back to Canada?
it continues to be a conversation.
Hmm.
So I'll leave it at that. We're very much considering it, but
Hmm. Hmm.
we've lived here almost a quarter century in the US, and leaving for California to Canada is certainly much more difficult when you have a family than it seems on the surface. Um, Parts of Canada are having absolutely brutal times with COVID too. I'm from Montreal originally, and Montreal's in a complete crisis at the moment. So any of those conversations are tabled until this pandemic subsides.
Do you speak any French?
Yep.
Oh, I had no idea. Great.
It's very, very rusty, but it's there. I can read
Mhm.
fluently with no problem. Speaking, I have to really get up some courage.
Okay, so maybe
French Canadian, as the French would say,
yeah, sure, sure, of
not
course.
real French.
Yeah.
Quebecois French, yes.
Okay, so maybe
That was Saturday night, the hot dog. Anyway, yeah.
so I wanted to ask you about because you mentioned him before, your son Devin.
Yeah,
How old is he now?
he's 13.
13 already. Wow.
Yes.
Wow.
The
Um,
next time you have a gig here, he'll be there.
Fantastic. Um, because I've become a father about 1.5 years ago, and I'm just curious to hear from you. You as a person who is very dedicated to his work. Um, what influence did fatherhood have on your work and on your ability to work? Let's say.
There's different phases of that. You're in the absolute toughest phase right now, where your time is dramatically impacted, as well it should be.
Yes.
You're in the utter magical period of ages 1 through 5. Those are astounding years to be a father, and you're, I presume, in the big struggle at the moment
Mhm.
of ensuring that that kid is taken care of on a minute by minute basis, and all the mercurial ups and downs that happen. And it gets easier as you get into the really magical ages of 3 to 5, when suddenly there's this little incredibly intellectually curious person emerging.
Mhm.
uh, I assure you that those will be among the greatest years of your whole life.
Mhm.
What does it mean for work? Wow, I mean, work kind of just stopped for the first year, really. I mean, it didn't stop, but it certainly took a dramatic backseat. I'm a gigaholic. I mean, people laugh at me that I probably go to more concerts than most musicians will perform in a
Mhm.
year. That's no longer the case, I assure you. Um, that all took a backseat. I tried to be a responsible father, and hopefully still am. Uh, what was great was when he could start coming to gigs, and then I was like, fantastic. It's like, that's the solution. Babysitting's $17 an hour. The ticket's 25. Take the kid to the gig. So that's what I started to do. And Devin started coming to dozens upon dozens of concerts. So he was like seeing Pharaoh Sanders at age 7, and um, things I could get him into. Unfortunately, Stickman was always playing 21 and over venues, mostly in the Bay Area. So I couldn't usually bring him. But yeah, what was funny about Devin is he started going to so many concerts with me. And I got him a guitar early on, and he just suddenly said, maybe I can do that, Dad. I'm like, what do you mean you can do that? It's like, maybe I'll play guitar on a stage someday. It's like, okay. And he started getting fairly serious about his guitar, taking lots of lessons, forming all kinds of little bands from age 8 to 13. It's been very difficult even for him, actually, to
Mhm.
suddenly not be able to play with people.
Mhm.
Uh, that was like a serious area of socialization. But so many things with Devin have blown my mind. Peter Chilvers is making an album with him right now.
Mhm. Wow.
Peter Chilvers, Devin Prasad release in the next few months, believe it or not. It's fascinating stuff they're working on. Devin ended up on stage at a Bill Laswell gig at Bill's insistence, which I still have trouble getting my head around, because Bill is one of my uh, most one of the biggest influences on my life is Bill Laswell's work. And to suddenly see my 12-year-old up on a stage playing with Bill and Graham Haynes and Guy Licata, was the most mind-bending experience of my life. And so I don't know what he's going to do with it, but he's getting, to go back to your question, they get more self-directed as they go, and I have not been pushing him to do any of this.
Hmm.
He just has sort of, he's been around in music all the time, as your kids, plural, maybe a future, will be. You know, if you're around something that much, if going to gigs just becomes like part of your daily experience, or weekly experience for him, or listening to music all the time. And he also, the one other thing I'll say about Devin is, he seemed to realize very early on that girls are really interested in musicians. So I don't know how he figured that one out so early, but he had one little concert where there were like 5 little girls screaming in front of him, and I'm like, how the hell did you make that happen? It's like, it's like, who are these
It's so
girls? I didn't
funny.
even find out about this. Why are they screaming for you? Anyway, so it's fatherhood's a great thing. It's a lot of fun, a lot of challenges, but it certainly takes away time, and that's okay. It's all right for it to
Yes.
take away time. You do less, maybe, but maybe what you do is, maybe it forces you to, you know, more narrowly focus your time for something more worthwhile.
Yeah, exactly. And it's for me, it's part of this process of total reinvention. Like, she was born in October 2019, so yeah.
I mean, I guess I presume right now, one of the good things is you get to spend incredible amounts of time with her. Maybe that's,
Exactly.
I mean, that's one
Yeah.
of the few good things that come out of this.
Yes.
So,
Yeah, and I'm
um,
very, very happy about that. And like, really, I would have been gone for 5 to 6 months out of the year, and now, or I saw her like 24/7 for a
right.
whole year. So it's incredible. Yeah, and I'm not complaining about that. And I
That's
just and I
totally
just
good.
realized, her middle name is Devi, so without the N, but just like
Oh,
the
really?
Muslim. Yeah.
That's cool. The Devi and Devon have many cross-cultural, as I'm sure,
Yes.
elements from Ireland to India. That's why we chose that name.
Yeah.
And it
Beautiful.
ultimately, intimates the divine, right? So,
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah. Okay, my friend, I think that's it for today. And it was really wonderful to talk with you again. And you are very civilized with your opinions.
Good to know.
Yeah, and I really hope I get to see you in real life
Oh,
again very soon.
I
Yeah,
can't wait
yeah,
for, I miss live music so much, as
yeah.
I'm
Me
sure you
too. Me
do.
too.
So I hope we connect in reality soon.
Yes. Okay. Thank you, Anil.
All the best to you.
Yeah. All the best to you and your
Thanks.
family.
Bye.
Yeah. Bye bye.